Hi, folks. Tom Johnson Medlin. I wanted to share a few moments of reflection with you to look at issues of spiritual care, the delivery of spiritual care, and the issues surrounding spiritual practices in formation and direction during a time like this, during the COVID-19 pandemic. There's a story that comes from Mount Athos that one day a visitor to the holy mountain in Greece, where all of the monastic houses are, one day a visitor came to one of the Gerondes, or one of the holy fathers, and said to him, "Father, what is it you do all day here on Mount Athos? There are no places of employment. There are many monasteries. There are many hours of prayer. Um, there's communal food and meals that are taken. There's the welcoming of guests. But what do you people do all day in between the prayer?" And the Yerunde looked at him and said, "My child, I fall and get up. I fall and get up. I fall and get up again." That's always been a wonderful cone to me from the Orthodox tradition, that this falling and getting up is really the routine repetition of life, that as spiritual care providers, directors, and those offering formation, spiritual formation to people, and offering spiritual supports to people, that we have to pretty quickly get used to the falling and getting up of human nature, because that is really the stuff, right? That is those are the supplies or ingredients of the work that we do on a daily basis, is helping people to come to terms with that. Also come to terms with how to cope with whatever it is that life throws at them, right? And to put that into some kind of a perspective where they can take their belief in a God or a universal principle and figure out a way to believe that all of the things that they've experienced somehow make sense in a world where this divine one lives and is in charge, right? So right now we've got a lot of people who are trying to figure out a whole lot of things. They're trying to figure out why this is happening, and looking for a way to assign blame. We have a lot of people who are isolated, in particular because now we've been asked to stay in our homes in most areas in the country, and to only go out to get the things that we need, that are survival items like food and beverage and any medicines. So that isolation is going to make people lose connection, contact, and resources that normally would help them process the difficulties of life. So now the difficulty in life is keeping them from having the things that they normally use to process the difficulties of life. We're in a unique position as spiritual care providers and those who provide direction and formation, because most of our spiritual practices and spiritual traditions have a way of still functioning, a way of still delivering support, a way of offering internal mechanisms of change that don't require a lot of stuff. That you can be, as a matter of fact, in most of our traditions, there have been people who isolated intentionally in order to find a more spiritual life. So isolation is actually something that we should all be familiar with. What we may not be familiar with is what are some of the side effects of isolation when it's an enforced isolation as opposed to a chosen isolation. So, we're going to see a lot more people that are lonely. We are going to see a lot of people that are feeling dispossessed. We're going to feel a lot of people feeling disenfranchised. So these are things that we should become understandably familiar with on a routine basis. But the thing that I really wanted to present to you today is that really some of the care that we're going to offer will be as simple as helping people to find one thing, one practice for their personal individual self, one act, one practice, one ritual for their communal, familial selves, and maybe a practice for their social selves, right? So again, it's getting back to this one thing. What will that one thing be that they will do on a daily basis to give them a sense of connection to replenishment and refreshment? For me, it's my 30 minutes in the morning of sitting in stillness and quiet. That has been a stronghold for me and must continue for me to find a sense of value in my spiritual sense of self. So, helping people to find that one thing, maybe it's reading a psalm every day in quiet. Maybe it's writing in a journal every day by themselves. Maybe it's taking a walk, right? But whatever it is, anchoring people to one simple practice will be very important because their lives have been structurally simplified because of the isolation, but also structurally complicated. And by that I mean we're maybe stuck in our homes and only a few people going out to provide medical care for other people, right? So we would think that our life is going to slow down. But unfortunately, that slowing down will produce a sense of anxiety because so many other things will appear to us during that time of being slowed down that we will become knocked off our game. And I think you can understand what I'm saying if any of you have tried to meditate. When you first sit for meditation, right, to sit in stillness and solitude and silence and to become refreshed by God, by the soul, by the spirit. But that's not really what happens at the beginning. What happens at the beginning is every stinking thought that you have put on hold, every little notion, feeling, and idea that you have not addressed in the past comes to talk to you. And so that isolation is not really filled with a sense of abandonment. No, instead, all of these visitors show up to tell you why you should think of them and deal with them right now. And that's what people are going to face in that isolation down into the home of individuals. They're going to come up with all of this inner content that's going to just rise up, or all of the news media is going to impact them, and they're going to get frustrated and anxious over the plethora of activity that exists in their isolation. Add to that, when people are with families, there will be other people present with them who also have the same things going on. So it's really going to become an amped up um, drama. It's almost like this big stage we're all on now is going to have a lot of actors wandering on the stage, and some of them are going to be, going over their dialogues, not paying attention to anybody else and acting as if nobody else is there. But these are the sorts of shifts we're going to see for people. And I think it's important for us to remember that we do know some things that can help people, right? So there might be some possibility for us to sit with people, listen to their stories, and help them to find one anchor, one activity. And I suggested that they do it for themselves individually, right? So they should have their own time, regardless of what it is. If it's 5 minutes, but it should be repeated, and it should have a level of commitment. They should decide to make a commitment to that time during this entire crisis, right? Hopefully beyond that, but that they commit to that time on a routine, AKA daily basis. And it doesn't need to be a large amount of time. And the craft of whatever it is they do during that time, I give you a small list of things, but there are many other options that you have based on your spiritual traditions, but finding that one practice. Then, if they live in a home where other people are also present, there should be some kind of routine practice that that group goes through. And it doesn't have to be a ritual, like saying prayer together or lighting a candle and singing a song. Well, those things are wonderful, and you can't escape the beauty that comes from them and the growth that comes from them. But it may be as simple as saying, twice a week we're going to have a game night. Um, or every night at dinner we're going to do this same thing. I know that earlier on when our kids were younger, we used to like to do two truths and a lie at the table. Everybody had to go around and say two things that were true that happened to them that day, and then one thing they had to make up, which was the lie, and then everybody had to guess which one was the lie. So again, individual self having some kind of a practice, familial selves or small community selves should have a practice. And then if we're a part of these large organizations like churches or support groups or temples or synagogues or workplaces, there should be some kind of a routinized activity that people engage in. And for the workplace, as well as for the spiritual and religious communities, what ends up happening is this event then becomes a focal point where we can say to ourselves as a people, we are doing something to tend ourselves and our souls during this time. So the individual does that by doing their individual practice. The family and small community does that with their practice. And then the organization or the social group does that by their practice. And as we begin to do these things, it will begin to slowly lessen the anxiety people have, because some of that anxiety comes from just not having a thing to do in order to combat this. Some of this will alleviate tension over time too, because then we will start to physically, viscerally feel as if we're coming to some sort of baseline in knowing what to expect. But right now, we just on a daily basis have no clue as to what to expect. So that anchoring piece is really important. It was the first thing I wanted to share. And then I think the other thing is that we're all adopting and adapting and developing new ways to reach out to people that are digital, right? I'm doing this Zoom for you. We all have phone calls that we make. We all have Skypes or other ways in which we can share FaceTime, right? Or being live on Facebook, right? Any of these things, these are new technology related ways to meet and greet. Try to remember that there is a stress level in that for you, right? And as you are picking up these new tools, remember that using them will take you one step away from your ability to provide spiritual support. In other words, when you're sitting there using these technologies, you will believe inwardly that somehow this is different than any of the other ways in which you've provided care to people in the past. And it is. You could get stuck on the technical pieces of technology and, did I do that right? And I push that right button. Is the volume good? How is the sound, everybody? And what do I look like? Oh my God, that's horrible. You could get stuck in those areas, which we often do. But remember, as you're utilizing these technologies, however you're using them, that we all still have the basic core tools that we've used throughout all of our spiritual practices and all of our spiritual development as individuals. And that is the ability to sit with people, the ability to listen to what it is they have to say, and the ability to ask open-ended questions that will help them probe a little deeper and pull on that string a little bit more to find out what it's attached to inside. We always still have that skill set, regardless of whether we're using Zoom or whether we're sitting, in a Starbucks having a cup of coffee with a person, right? Let's get back to the simplification of the relationship of spiritual direction and spiritual practice. It's person to person. That's all it is. Maybe a piece of technology in between, but at the end of the day, remember that you're still listening to stories, asking questions, right? And sharing reflections back again. That's what this is. But allow yourself to acknowledge that there's a certain level of stress that comes from how am I going to provide spiritual care in this new age, in this new world, in this new landscape that we've got. And I just want to remind you, you're going to provide it the same way you always have. You're going to listen to people, you're going to ask questions, and you're going to reflect back. There's another story I love. It's similar to the fall and get up and fall and get up and fall and get up. But William Stafford, who's a wonderful American poet, I'm not sure how many of you know him, but Stafford is really the great grandfather of many poets in America. People like Robert Bly or Gary Snyder, Naomi Shihab Nye, Sandra McPherson. I mean, the list is eternal of the people that Stafford taught. But Stafford encouraged his students and also those who emulated him to every day get up and write a poem and just do that. It doesn't have to be first thing, it could be whenever, but that the practice was get up and write a poem. Because when you do that, then you're going to establish not only a routine, but you're going to be developing growth because you're practicing every day, right? It's not just a routine, but you're also, every time you do it, you're chipping away at your skill set and you're making yourself much better at the task at hand. And so somebody asked him, Bill, what do you do when you write a bad poem that day? And a lot of his poems, exist still as fragments. And there are a couple of really good books of aphorisms of his, just portions or poem seeds that he wrote, during the day. But he looked at the person who said, what do you do when you write a bad poem? And without skipping a beat, he just said, I lower my standards. So I'm going to ask you to lower your spiritual care standards in that don't get all stressed out about the technology and whether that is perfect. Your true stress should really remain close to your core. Are you listening to people? Are you offering them open-ended questions? And are you reflecting back? Are you able to do that? Because if you can do that, even if you've got a tin can and a string, that's all the technology you need to be able to provide the thing that is most central to that deep human work that we do. Right? And then help people to figure out what their one thing is a day to get through this. It's not going to take away all the stressors. It's going to give them a landing place, a safe island. It's going to give them what we know Abraham Joshua Heschel was referring to when he talked about in his book, The Sabbath, that place in time where we can have encounter. And that's critical. That is the most critical piece that we can offer back during this time. So thanks for spending some time here. Please reach out if you want to chat about this further, or if you have any additions or deletions that you think should attend this. Bye-bye.